They hear what the people they talk. Once again, I shall kill it till love. This is love, and I wanna get another one. I go take and do it in I love. Waiting you love, oh. Maybe waiting I love, oh. Waiting I love, I go do what we done my heart, oh. Go no be vodka. Mr. Money Changer. But when I know the ways that Mr.
You let a yum 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 yum. Nayela pere, mat nayela pese. You let a yum 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 yum. Nayela pere, muna kapera, chora kakisa, bayari yela pere, balungna bayre.
All right, good afternoon. It's yet another Saturday afternoon here in the Boston area. I believe it's about 7 p.m. in Ghana. And then we come your way as usual with the assembly. Today we're going to talk about the election that Ghana had last week. There's been a lot of praises for Ghana for having again delivered a spectacular election, which was devoid of widespread violence. It's been credited as a very credible election. But we are here to basically do a postmortem of that election. The NDC appeared to win very decisively by about 1.6 million votes. They also gained what some have described as a supermajority in parliament, with probably over 2/3 of the seats in parliament. But beneath this blowout, there are certain nuances that we would want to interrogate. So the question today is this an overwhelming mandate for the NDC, or this was a rejection of the ruling NPP? So with me here to do justice to this topic are Mr. Conrad Dumba, who is the chairman of the NDC UK Ireland branch, Dr. Atta Kwabena Kennedy, who is a physician based here in the United States, but also a founding member of the New Patriotic Party. Joining us later would be Manasseh Azore Awini, who is a renowned journalist in Ghana, and also Dr. Joshua Zato, who is a senior lecturer at the University of Ghana, but also a member of the NPP. So for now, gentlemen, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Yes. So I will begin with the question that I posed as the topic for this afternoon's discussion. Was this a mandate or a rejection of the status quo? And I will begin with Conrad on this question.
Thank you, Dr. Agana, and a very good evening to Dr. Atta Kennedy. It's my pleasure to share this platform with you this very good evening, my time in UK, and I believe it's afternoon time yours. And a very good evening to all the cherished viewers and listeners, and to all of us. I think 2024 elections will go down as an election like no other. I know it is from in the NDC circles, we tend to look at the 2008 elections as the mother of all elections. If that is the case, then this would be the grandmother of all elections, if not great grandmother of all elections. Only because there's so much that happened and so much came to the fore in terms of the results. And going back to the question you asked, whether this was a mandate or a rejection, I'm not really sure the mind behind the question and whether the answer, the expected answer, was supposed to be one which was binary, or if you like, the two options you provided before your question mark were supposed to be mutually exclusive in the answer. I think it's a little bit of both. If not a little bit of both, it's an emphatic and a large part of both, because it depends on which side of the coin you sit at, and we should look at it in that context. The results, and I'm sure you would see my colleagues from the NPP, nobody saw this coming. In fact, when the now, if you like, celebrated Musa Dankwa put out his post, personally, I had always expected that President Mahama should be chalking somewhere no less than 58% of the vote. Based on what I've seen, what I've known, what I've read around, that's the kind of personal conclusion I came to. So these results were no shock to me. I more than expected it. And when I thought the country spent the best part of a number of weeks touring the country from the upper west, upper east, northern region, western region, Ashanti region, all the way through many other regions and communities. And we spent, myself and my team, particularly in the week into the election, we spent a large amount of our time in the Ashanti region, in Bosumpi and a few other constituencies in there. And what we saw, what we heard on the ground, what we experienced, was pretty much vindicated by the results that have come to the fore. Now, I would like to think that this is a very emphatic mandate that has been given to President Mahama for many good reasons. One is the very practical and enduring policies and programs and vision that President Mahama has sold. There is no one in Ghana today that would say that we do not need jobs, jobs, and jobs. There is no one that disagrees that as a country, we need to re-engineer our economy to work for all and not just a few. That we need to get to a point where we are, if you like, sweating the assets that we hold as a nation more. In other words, moving to a 24-hour cycle type of economy where possible. It's not every industry that will lend itself to that. But as many industries as lend themselves to, that we transition to that mode of working rather than the current mode of sleep 12 hours and work 8 hours and the other 4 hours we spend at Oxford Street to chill. Making sure that when I'm in bed, someone else is operating that same machine to continue to be productive. So that we are able to produce enough, whatever it may be, to try to engage in some form of import substitution and reduce the pressure that we have on our city. That it's able to ensure that we put in place the structures that are needed to create more jobs for the teeming youth. And so for our economy was pretty much what, in my view, sold. Many others, the oral program, the level of corruption that you'd see call for the oral. And so that, for me, is the emphatic mandate given to President Mahama. But the flip side was the fact that pretty much everything the NDC stood for, our brothers in the NPP pushed against. And so giving a strong mandate to President Mahama effectively amounts to an emphatic rejection of the status quo of what Bawumia and the NPP went into 2024 and offered to Ghanaians. Ghanaians didn't want more of the same. Ghanaians wanted the change that was supposed to deliver our country from the shackles of poverty and the corruption that has plagued us over the last 8 years.
Okay. All right. So you believe that it was the vision of the NDC that got them this mandate, but we'll come
Absolutely.
to the details. Yeah, we'll come to the details of the election, the breakdown, and then we interrogate that question further. But I want to go to Dr. Ata Kennedy. In fact, I have your book here, Chasing the Elephant into the Bush. You wrote this book as more or less a postmortem for the NPP after the 2008 election, in which you were the communications director or director of the campaign. if I'm correct. Now, that election was a lot closer than this election. In fact, in the first round of the election, the NPP was leading. Even in the second round, it had to take one constituency to be counted for the election or the winner of the election to be decided. So that was a closely fought election. So my question is, do you see any parallels between this loss to the NPP with what happened in 2008?
Yeah, good afternoon to your viewers and to your listeners and to Conrad. I actually think that politicians are funny. Every politician who wins an election thinks he has a mandate. Even Trump in 2016 thought he had a mandate, even though he lost the popular vote. So I actually think it is a little bit of both, like Conrad says, but it is more of a rejection than a mandate. I think that actually even a lot of NDC people I spoke to off the record thought that this campaign has not been as energetic as previous ones by Mr. Mahama and the NDC. I think this was a referendum on the NPP administration. It boiled down to the eternal question, are you better off than you were 4 or 8 years ago? And I think Ghanaians emphatically answered the question, no, they were not. And indeed, there were a lot of other things. For example, the global environment for incumbents was bad. People in US and Britain and quite a few other African countries had lost elections, exceptions being Namibia. So I think that change was in the air. And then there was, of course, Ghanaians' predilection to change the government in power every 8 years. I think that that's a good attitude. So the Ghanaian public has been looking for change, and they will keep changing till they get what they want. But I think this was more of a rejection than a mandate. But as they say in soccer, whether you won by an own goal or you won by your center forward scoring, is a victory. So this is a victory for the NDC, and I wish President Mahama well. I am actually more optimistic than most other people are, because I think that he has seen defeat before, and I think that he's an intelligent guy. He's a fellow Vandal. I'm sure he has reflected on the reasons for his last defeat. And so there is hope that he would have learned from his mistakes, and that going forward it will be better. I think the 24-hour economy idea is a good one. It isn't original, but I don't understand why people were kicking against it. Indeed, 24-hour economies have always existed since time immemorial. Back home in our villages, the hunters went to hunt at night because they knew that was when they would find game. When I was at the university, traveling between Accra and Kumasi, we took the midnight bus from New Plant Station, and by the next morning, it was in the next city, Accra or Kumasi, depending upon where you were going. I remember a carpenter who used to live in my house, and they worked right behind the house. Getting to Christmas, they worked throughout the night making nkronia, which is this wooden things with which they make shoes, because they knew that the shoemakers will buy the nkronia to make shoes that they will sell for Christmas, because the markets increase during Christmas. So the 24-hour economy has been time tested. It's a sound idea. I think, though, that it is not government that necessarily commandeers a 24-hour economy. If the fundamentals are in place, private businesses like I was talking about, whether it is transport owners or shoemakers or whoever it is, will take advantage. So I think it's a good idea. And actually, if the MPP will be honest, even Dr. Baumia's digital economy will operate 24/7, 365. So on that, and I think everybody who is honest would agree. But I think the dividing thing, one of the things that led to the MPP's significant defeat was the culture of corruption.
Okay.
That happened in procurement and awards of contract coupled with arrogance and yentobia, stuff like that.
But it seems like, I was looking over your book again before this episode, and the issues that you just mentioned are similar to those that you mentioned in 2009 after the defeat. So, I mean, is this something that politicians are just unable to help themselves, or do they ever learn from the mistakes of the past?
They can, but they didn't learn this time. I actually think that, and those of you who've been following the Ghanaian media, I agree with you. Actually, somebody asked me whether I'll write another book, and I said it was unnecessary because the issues were the same. It's just that this time they were worse. So there is no need for a new book. I think politicians don't learn, and I think there was a problem that surfaced interestingly in 2009. I met late Kwabnaji, who was then chairman of the NDC, Professor Dunketia, who was then general secretary, in the company of McMenu and Ohininto. And the sets of people managing political parties had a very interesting conversation with me as a fly on the wall.
Okay.
The NDC duo were complaining that President Mills wanted to send them away as ambassadors out of the country so that he could put more willing people in their place and quote unquote take over the party. And they lamented that once presidents are elected, they think they are independent agents and they don't listen to the party. And the NPP duo agreed. So the four of them were talking about how they could collaborate to bring South African style reforms that will help parties to be able to recall presidents, like the ANC recalled Mbeki.
Okay.
I recite this thing because I think the MPP started losing this election before the 2016 election. If you recall, Paul Afoko and Kwabena Japan were removed from their position against the vociferous opposition of a few people like myself. And I warned them that Nanado will learn from that episode that the party was his property and that he could do whatever he wanted to do. And indeed, that's what he did. That is why he refused to remove Kenneth Furiat. He refused to do cabinet reshuffles because in his mind, the party, and even more to the point, the cabinet was his property, like Kufuor used to say. So he wouldn't listen to anybody. So we need accountability, not just financial accountability, but policy accountability. And we need stronger parties that will insist that presidents execute the mandates for which they were nominated.
Okay. All right. I'll come to you later with the future of the NPP with respect to its leadership as we currently speak. But let me introduce Dr. Joshua Jobuntie Zato, who is a senior lecturer at the University of Ghana, but also a member of the New Patriotic Party. And Joshua, I would want to pose the same question to you, the question as to whether this victory by the NDC is a mandate or it's a rejection of the NPP government.
Thank you very much and good evening to our listeners. I think I'm new to this platform and I should say that I'm kind of on the hot seat. If you can see, I just got home from work and there's still a lot of, I'm trying to organize a restructure and be myself. I think one of the things that we should be cautious in doing is to try to see the victory of the NDC and for that matter, the loss of the NPP in isolation. I think it would be myopic for us to do that. Last 2 years ago, there were 3 coups d'etats in West Africa. I think Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Mali. And that the whole world and almost all higher academics in the world went, democratic retrogression in Africa. Democracy was progressing, blah, blah, so much. People didn't contextualize that these 3 countries in particular, there was something common about them, there was something unique about them, and that even if it is just West Africa, coup d'etats in 3 countries doesn't mean a regression when the remaining 13% were still democratic. It's a similar thing. If you take the last 2 years or so, about 4 to 7 incumbent governments in Africa have lost elections. 2 opposition parties. If you just take Africa alone, about that. If you extend it outside Africa, you can look at the United States of America. You can look at the UK and other democracies. In fact, right now, there's still there's trouble and some uprising in France. Citizens all over the world are rejecting incumbent governments. It is just one of those things. Citizens are rejecting incumbents. So it's not an Africa, it's not a Ghana problem. It's not an Africa problem. It's not a world problem. It's just that citizens all over the world are rejecting their government. That's what I'm saying, that you need to put what is happening here in context. As a similar thing happened in Senegal, a similar thing happened, was it in Kenya? A similar thing happened in a number of African countries. You put it within that context. Now, you can trace the roots a little bit back to COVID. Before COVID, there was the belief in government wasn't there, especially in the Western countries. Nobody wanted government for anything. COVID made people to believe in government. And you realize that in the 2001 elections, almost all the incumbent governments that were able to manage COVID relatively well won re-election. Almost all the candidates that demonstrated that they knew a thing or two about managing that did. And once they did that, my theory is that citizens' interest and belief in government to do things increased. And the post-COVID reaction hasn't been equal, hasn't been fair, and hasn't been fast enough. So the vulnerability.
Okay, I think we lost Joshua right there. But
that,
yeah, okay. All right, technical issues in Ghana. But Conrad, I mean, Joshua is raising very important points here with respect to the troubles of incumbents across the world, right? Where many incumbent governments post-COVID have lost re-election. And I also want us to look into the details of these election results, right? So for instance, in this election, the NDC appears to only increase its margin from 2020 by about maybe 150,000 votes, right? And even with that, 1.7 million voters were added to the register post 2020. So it doesn't appear as though the NDC actually added voters from 2020 election. I mean, so how do you sit with this, for instance, looking detailed into the election result, the fact that it doesn't seem like you were able to shift a lot of voters to your side? I mean, people have attributed this to the low voter turnout, but the low voter turnout seemed to be against the incumbent government rather than the opposition. So I don't know what your take is on with this post-COVID losses across the world, and also looking deep into the numbers. Is there a cause to be concerned by the NDC with these results?
So, I mean, thank you again for that question. First and foremost, I think you asked 2 questions. The first question is around the fate of incumbent governments across the globe. I disagree here to a certain extent with my brother, Dr. Jatu, to the extent that I'm sure he didn't make that categorical statement. But there are examples of governments, elections 2024, which have even surpassed. Take Mexico as a classic case in point, where an incumbent government has gone on to win a very emphatic victory. And we have examples across board. It's problematic. I mean, if COVID were to be responsible for some of these results, then it should have probably been more emphatic in the previous election to a certain extent. I disagree that COVID has any effect on this particular election. If anything, maybe the fallout from COVID. And what's the fallout from COVID? Countries where governments have managed COVID very well financially, as well as from a basic common sense perspective. And you saw what happened to Trump. You know, you mess it up, you are thrown out. COVID helped to get Trump out. But 4 years down the lane, I disagree that it was part of it. And it's famously said in business, you think global but act local. In politics, it's pretty much the same. And that's why in our context, you even tell you that the elections are won at the polling station. Almost every single village or town that I visited, the problems had certain, if you like, if you take each of their problems and looked at them from a Venn diagram perspective, they had certain common points, but the issues were sometimes different. A lot of the local issues, you know, everybody definitely had issues with roads, with water, but there were even more local issues. And in the context of Ghana, the reality of Ghana is that our economy basically tanked. The cost of living went right up. Now, are we tracing that back to COVID, or are we tracing it to bad management? What is the quantum? For example, the woes of our economy are driven directly by the excessive debt overhang we have. If you look at the quantum of that debt attributable directly to COVID, it's quite infinitesimal, it's quite small. So arguably, you couldn't trace it back to COVID. You know, so for me, I think we need to take a step back and look at the issues at hand. Jobs is one issue. The economic hardship. I mean, you can take certain basic staples. Even 4 years ago, compare the price points. You take a ball of kenke, when you look at economics, you could get a ball of kenke for 50 pesos way back in 2016. Even in 2020, you could still get it for somewhere about a CD and 50 pesos. Now you're looking for a decent ball of kenke, you're looking at about 7 cities. I don't think that it is COVID that has driven that. But the economic hardship, and you could see it, you could feel it when you are on the ground. It was really very, very painful for a lot of people. And so a lot of those who came out to vote, they voted because economic hardship was staring them in the face. And in the face of such economic hardship, you had some, if you like, nauseating affluence being exhibited plainly by office holders, by government appointees, as if there was nothing absolutely wrong. Money was being disbursed. You should see people being paid to vote. In my own little village, things were being shared to voters on the night of it, on the eve of election. You saw television sets being shared. You saw things that were being shared, and that really, it pissed a lot of people off. And so I want us to stick to it local. There are many reasons. The reasons for ANC not achieving the electoral victory they are used to are not exactly the same as the reason for Ghana. And like I said, you have Mexico, you have other countries where actually incumbent governments prevailed. And so I disagree to that extent. Now, when it comes to the point about low turnout, it affected both parties. If you take 2020 results and you take 2022 results, for example, the NDC share of votes in Greater Accra region came down from 2020 to 2024, right? The same as the NPP. The Ashanti region, the NDC is a lot much better than previously was the case. And so the voter turnout affected both parties. Perhaps because of the shambolic performance of the government, its strongholds failed to turn up. They were not gingered enough to turn up. The other thing we have to be very clear here is that a number of votes in that country were padded votes. And I can say this on authority. Myself and my UK team spent a fair amount of time in the Ashanti region. You should see the walls we had to bulldoze through to stop the steal happening. And so when, for example, my organizer Yamin discovered 500,000 ballot papers that were charged somewhere prepared to be thrown into the mix, the question you will ask is, if those had come in, what do you think the outcome would have been like? I'm not saying we prevent every single situation, but there are a number of factors that led to it. And I wouldn't say, look, we lost it because of COVID, or the NPP lost because of COVID, or because of low voter turnout. Part of that voter turnout in certain regions could be attributable to more vigilance by the then opposition party or the current opposition party, NDC, to ensure, and we invested a lot in this. So those are some of the factors that need to be taken into account. And I'll be honest with you, when we're in the Ashanti region, some of the people in the Ashanti region were telling us, watch that polling station, for example, Manchester, where we concentrated a fair amount of it. So watch it, this is where they usually pad. And truth be told, the stories will come out. We saw so many such instances. So the reasons are myriad. They are not just one single. I will be hesitant to take a global position and impose it on our election.
Okay. All right. Let me bring Dr. Arthur Kennedy in on this matter. Should the NDC be also concerned, given the numbers that we've seen in the election? Because I mean, usually the thing is, if, for instance, in 2020, people were willing to vote for the NDC, would there be a reason why the low voter turnout would impact those who would vote for them in 2024?
Yeah, I think that respectfully, I disagree with Conrad a little bit. Yes, there were global factors, and actually, I think COVID was an issue, not the disease itself, but COVID brought all economic activity to a halt across the globe. So the way that governments managed to restart their economies affected their performance and their reputations. So the MPP after COVID, I think, didn't do well in government. For example, even sticking with COVID, the way that the COVID relief funds were shared, we got about $3 billion total dollars from external funders. And I think that giving some of this or most of this money to party functionaries to share for mitigation was a gross example of corruption. As far as the low turnout is concerned, it goes to a number of issues. First, I have always felt that our voters' rolls are padded. In other words, they are bloated.
Loaded.
The reason they are bloated is that in spite of the new registrations that we keep doing, what happens is that normally if you are doing dynamic biometric registration, you should enter the directly into the database so that if there are duplicates and others, it will be rejected live. But what we do is we take laptops, load things on, and we go and dump it in later. So our voters' registration numbers have always been bloated. And if you want to find out, look at the percentage of our population that is under 18, as well as the number of people in our voters' register. There are not enough adults to justify the number of people in our voters' register. Having said, there is actually loss of confidence in democracy, particularly in Africa. And that is part of why we're seeing low voter turnout. Indeed, young men and women who used to celebrate people like Mandela and George Washington and Jefferson, in Africa now they talk about Kagame and Xi Jinping. And in a lot of West African countries, they are celebrating the young men who have staged coups. So democracy is losing a lot of its attraction to our people, and that is contributing to some of the turnout. Yes, there was no voter turnout, but it affected the MPP more because their supporters were more demoralized. You know, the NDC supporters were hopeful of victory. They were gingered up, so more of them showed up. So the drop-off in NDC voters wasn't as much as NPP voters. But having said that, he is right that there are always local factors. I think the corruption and the impunity and the arrogance was too much. When you spend 58 million US dollars digging a swimming pool when people can't get dialysis and people who deliver babies are bleeding to death and there is galamsey, rational voters will punish you for it. I think the MPP campaigned and behaved as if Ghanaian voters don't live in Ghana and don't know what is happening. But they live in, they know what is happening. So they voted thinking of those things.
Okay. All right. Okay, so let me bring Dr. Zato in to complete his thoughts. And then...
thank you, Agana. Sorry about it's the network issue. So
okay.
that's it now. I was making a point, I didn't finish, and I caught, should I say, the NDC chairman saying that I was blaming COVID. No. I want to put it on record. I never said COVID was the cause of the defeat. I never said that.
Okay. Yeah.
I was building.
Okay. So we have a challenge with Zato's internet. But let me bring Manasseh in here. So Manasseh, in 2016, most NDC folks blamed you for the NDC's loss, given the work that you had done on covering a lot of controversial issues, issues related to corruption. Now, is this win by the NDC a renewed, if you like, trust in President Mahama? Or again, back to the question of whether it was a total rejection of the incumbent?
For me, it was more of a total rejection of the incumbent. And I said in my book, The President Ghana Never Got, that the biggest tragedy of our democracy is that the repulsive Mahama of 2016 has become attractive in 2024 without having to do much or anything. And I think that isn't good enough. Prior to this election, I'd heard people say that, look, we don't trust that Mahama would come and do anything different, but we believe that these people have overstayed their welcome. It has been more of anger. And above everything else, this administration has displayed a lot of wickedness. And when people blame Ken Oforiatta, those who may not know much would think they're just angry. But I did at least one story. And after that, I could never think about Ken Oforiatta the way I saw him all my life. If you take this e-levy, there are artisans and people who sell online, do little businesses, and they were doing a lot of transactions online. When this e-levy started, it affected those businesses. For some of us, the 5-6 cities of the levy may not be a problem, but to many others, they found it very difficult to transact businesses. So why would you bring such a levy and then you go on to award a contract or cause a contract to be awarded to SML? And whoever watches that documentary we produced on SML would realize that an intelligent high school student who visits SML would realize that these people were doing nothing. Yet, Ken Oforiatta was behind the consolidated contract that was giving SML over 1 billion cedis a year. And when we did our calculations, the amount of money that was to go to SML every year was more than the total amount of revenue Ghana was making from the e-levy. So if you look at what happened, some of these taxes or some of these hardships could have been avoided. So the question is, why would a finance minister do this? And I'm talking about a company that is to be given over they had already been paid $148 or so million, and the new consolidated contract was given about $10 million every year. And you're looking at these people who tell you, okay, we generate figures. Do they use them for tax purposes? They say no. Why? The equipment or the measurement tools that are already there record superior figures than ours. And they give reasons for that. You claim you saved 3 billion. We come, oh no, it's not true. We didn't save that amount. So every claim these people made, we confronted them with evidence. And they had to go back on those claims. So this is just one example of how a policy, a tax policy, so unpopular. The effect on very small businesses that were not a burden on the state was huge. The effect was huge. Yet someone said, we have to push this through. After pushing that through, he goes behind to give a shady deal that is causing us to lose more than all the collections we were making from that single tax. So the question is, was this tax necessary? No. And back to the question about whether or not it is a trust or people just wanted to punish this administration. I did a write-up I think the day before the election, stating the strengths and weaknesses of each party. And with the NPP, I said that the debt restructuring that was done affected people. I have lived long enough in Ghana to know that sometimes when you talk about general issues of corruption mismanagement, certain individuals don't react well to such exposures. But the debt restructuring took money directly from some people. As we speak, last week, someone sent me a message that this person had about 28,000 CDs with data bank. When this person went to data bank, they said either the person waits till 2026, or if the person wanted to withdraw the 28,000, they would lose about 9,000 and get only 19,000. So this person is stuck, not knowing whether to withdraw the money and lose so much, or if the money is even kept up to 2026, the value will still be the same. Yep. And if this person has to even go ahead and request this money, that it will take about 4 months. And this investor actually said hers was not as bad as another old person he found or met at the bank. So all of these factors have come to get people very angry. People have taken it personally. And if you talk about business or commerce, when the economy is destroyed, so to speak, those who feel it more are those who are into business. And if you take the NPP's core base, they form some of the biggest group of people who are into business. Commerce, the Ashantis, the Kwaus, into business. Go to Abosiokai. These are your typical NPP supporters. So you cannot head them on all these fronts and expect to still win. And finally, the middle class, civil society, the media, some of these groups ordinarily, in my opinion, leaned more towards the NPP than the NDC. In the Akufo-Addo era, the NPP appears to have lost the media, lost civil society, and lost a chunk of the middle class. Whenever you did a post on Facebook talking about the problems, they would come and tell you, look, you're in Accra making noise. Go to the villages and see. They don't think like you think. Forgetting that those of us who live in Accra on a monthly basis send monies to our people in the villages. So if things are hard and you tell them, look, the government is not making things possible for me to give you money, they are likely to also be affected. So all of these factors have accounted for what has happened. And I don't think that people really love Mahama or the NDC so much, but they're just so fed up with the NPP. And it has become like a norm that the incumbent party often loses the election. It's not so much about the opposition winning. And this is what we are witnessing.
All right. So do you think this is an opportunity for the NDC to renew their trust with the Ghanaian people, right? If it's an overwhelming rejection of the governing party, now perhaps Mahama has a chance to redeem himself, so to speak. What are your expectations in terms of the NDC coming into power 2025?
I am pessimistic. The last time I trusted a politician so much was in 2016, when an alleged human rights activist and anti-corruption, whatever, gained power, and we were all celebrating. I had never trusted a politician like Akufo-Addo. He came and everything we heard or were told turned out to be the exact opposite. So I don't have my hopes so high, but I believe that President Mahama is in a position to first redeem himself, to give people who doubted the NDC or give them the benefit of the doubt more hope to stick with their party. And 3, reset the damaged institutions of state. And one of the ways to do that doesn't require money. If within the 4 years, the NDC under John Mahama doesn't build one school, doesn't build one hospital, doesn't add a kilometer of road, I wouldn't call them a failure. When they take over, they would realize that the economy and the problems we know perhaps have been worse than the general public actually knows, because the economy was about to pick up, and during election, they often spend so much to stay in power. So the problems may be worse than what we know. However, there is something he can do. When you watch television, as soon as the declaration was done and the cameras were sent to town, a lot of the voices that I heard were chanting the 1979 kind of slogan. But in this time, it wasn't blood, but they are calling for justice. They are calling for accountability. And I think if President Mahama is able to do that alone, some semblance of sanity will return to our politics. People have gotten away with so much in the past. Now, it is no longer hidden that a lot of people have messed up. If the NDC administration is able to bring them to account, I mean the people or those who served in the Akufo-Addo administration, it is going to also keep the NDC appointees on their toes, knowing that we are prosecuting these people. If we mess up, when they come, they are not going to forgive us. For some time now, it is as if the two parties have signed a pact that you do whatever you want. When we come, we can also do whatever we want, and then we let sleeping dogs lie. And that is what, in my view, is fueling the impunity in our system. But if we are able to get some people to pay for, now I'm hearing that from the NPP that Dr. Bawumia has paid or punished for sins he did not commit. Just last week, they wouldn't even admit that they had committed any sins. And now that they are admitting that the government committed sins, and we know those who committed the sins didn't come from a certain planet to do it and then go back. They were still members of this government. So if that accountability is restored, we should be getting somewhere. Okay. And the vindictiveness and targeting and destruction of state institutions, it may be very difficult for a government to say, look, I'm not going to do anything, but the NDC administration under Mahama would do Ghana a lot of good if it doesn't yield to pressure to also push as many of its supporters, some that don't even deserve to serve in public office, into certain very sensitive state institutions. As we speak, the Judiciary is almost gone. And apart from those of us who have been talking about it, we saw the Mo Ibrahim Governance Index. We saw the World Bank downgrading the audit service. And if you go into this, you would find some level of either overpacking the courts or fighting the Auditor General and bringing somebody who has never continued with the surcharge and disallowance. You would realize that journalists, many of us, have decided to self-censure because they cannot cope with the kind of vindictiveness that this administration has visited on people with critical voices.
Okay.
So if this administration that John Mahama is able to do these things, which may not necessarily require money, but it will require conviction leadership. And the president saying, look, we cannot keep going this way. I get afraid. What we are witnessing, and I very much agree with Dr. Arthur Kennedy that there is a very low vote of confidence on our democracy. If you're on WhatsApp platforms, they keep praising these coup makers in the Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, and others. We may get there. And a soldier said something that I quoted in my book, that the next coup d'etat in Ghana is not going to be organized by the military, that the civilians will organize it, and then we, the soldiers, will sit down and watch. This is what a Mahama administration should want to avoid. And if he does that, he will be cementing his own legacy, because some of us still do not think that the previous Mahama did well. And it shouldn't be taken to mean that, well, we made a mistake, that's why we voted him out in 2016. No. He is still the same Mahama, but Akufo-Addo has taken the messing up to a different level that makes him look like a saint. And that should not be forgotten.
All right. So hopefully the NDC is listening. You know, Chairman Kwarad is here. He's taking down notes. And then he'll be sure that the party does the right thing, having been given this second chance. But I would like to, Manasseh, you are a busy man, and thank you very much for coming. If you need to take leave, you're more than welcome to do
just
so.
To make a few points.
Yes, but let me go to
my brother Manasseh.
Okay.
I entirely associate with a lot of the points he's made. Where there's a point of departure between us is one thing I realize that as Ghanaians, we need to be realistic. One of the stories I liked from watching by the fireside when I was a kid was when Kwekwa Nancy went to God and said he wanted a wife with no mouth because the current wife was eating too many tubers of yam. Inherited a wife, came home, no mouth, of course, assumed that there would be no yam disappearing, only to find out that whole bands of yam were disappearing, hid behind something and realized that the mouth for that wife was actually under the armpit. The reality in our case is that no politician is an angel. They are human. And we holding them to account will determine whether or not they will rule well or not. Because every human is that human, not an angel. When we assume that these are angels, and then we have, for example, the media, the fourth realm of the estate, of which my brother is an integral part, I would say they have played a monumental role in abandoning Ghanaians. As we speak, 99% of the media is either bought by the politicians or in cahoots with the politicians. That is a fact. In another country where there was strong and sufficient civic, if you like, power or a strong civic society, we will not have a situation where a Galamsey simple crusade against Galamsey by Trade Union Congress collapsed, and we all know why. What we need for Ghana to go forward is for us as civilians, forget NPP, NDC, we must advocate for the right thing and hold every government to account. Unfortunately, in the last 8 years, the media has been quiet, and if not with quiet acquiescence, have been collaborators in enabling this administration to go as far as it has gone. One thing that gladdens my heart is that the media doesn't fear NDC. And so at the very least, the media will speak. My brother himself knows it. I mean, and we have to stop being anecdotal and factual. I'm not here to defend Mahama or anybody. For example, my brother knows it, and we've spoken on this in some other platforms. Things like Ford and all those stuff, they were, or even the Guinea fowl story, they begged the question. What we needed to do was to hold people to account. And I pray that the good people of Ghana will hold the NDC to account, hold our feet to the fire of accountability, because we are not angels. As is said in Akan language, the one cutting the road doesn't know when it's gone, if you like, it's curved. But we have to be activists enough to fight for Mother Ghana. No country develops with strong politicians or political parties. Countries that develop have a strong civic society that comes out. The kind of stuff that happened in Ghana over the last 8 years. In another country, people would have hit the streets and the government would have collapsed within weeks. When we discovered that, and I'm appealing to all of us here, I'm NDC, but I will mount the streets and I'll campaign against my own party if it went down 10% of what this administration has done. That is the way we move forward. Otherwise, if we sit back and either go for pseudo examples of corruption just for headlines or just hope that politicians will do right, it will not happen. That's a little I thought I should add to, or if you like, spice up my brother's delivery with. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay. So let me go to Dr. Atta Kennedy. Look, the NDC has almost a supermajority in Parliament. We have often complained about some of perhaps the lack of ability for a government to take total control and make decisive structural changes that would seal some of the loopholes that we have identified in our democracy as accounting for perhaps issues of corruption, public office mismanagement, abuse of office, and things like this. What are your expectations, given that beside the House and the executive have been entirely handed over to the NDC? They cannot complain about any sort of distraction or obstruction from any arm of government.
Well, before I go on to my expectations, let me react to what Manessa said and what my brother just said.
Okay.
I think the reason why there is corruption is because in the third world, and I got this from a book that gave me a very good insight. And in the end, the conclusion is that our countries are functioning the way that those who control the countries wanted to function. Over the last 8 years, if we want to be honest, what we have witnessed is organized transfer of public resources into private hands, whether it is into the hands of the Chebi Mafia or into the hands of Galamsey. So these are not aberrations. This is an organized looting of the public space and public resources. And until we recognize that, nothing will change. As far as my brother is concerned about the media being pro-NPP and other, I don't think he's fair to the media. I think a lot of people in the media suffered, including Manasseh and Efiepuku and others. Some of them had to leave the country for some time because they were being harassed by the government. I think that in addition to calling for demonstrations and others like he rightly did, another thing we can do is show support for people who are under attack, like say Manasseh, like Efiepuku, or like even people in government, like Frimpong Boateng, for example, and Martin Amidu. We always say we want honest governance and we want people to do this and that. When people do the right thing and they show leadership and they are under attack, we abandon them because we all want to do things that will butter our bread. Frimpong Boateng refused to sign off on an $88 million judgment debt. And he writes, it's an interview on the record. The next day, they showed up in his house to offer him a $5 million bribe. When the thing was reported by African Watch, nobody said anything in Ghana. I was stunned. If we do these things, we should not be surprised that in future, when these things are being done, people don't stand up. As for my expectations, I think Manasseh is right that Yes, it's not a different John Mahama, but hopefully he has learned. So first, our country needs our institutions rebuilt. I think that the NPP has bastardized the courts. The independence of the courts are in doubt. Auditor General was removed in a way that made a lot of us unhappy. The Electoral Commission leadership was changed. Virtually every institution has retreated in terms of its strength. So we need to rebuild institutions. But the biggest institution is Parliament. The Parliament of Ghana. I think that the star of the last 4 years, a lot of people don't know it, probably has been Babin, who has had to manage a divided parliament and has had a lot of things thrown at him, from the executive refusing to sign bills passed by parliament to nonsense rulings by the Supreme Court that were blatantly partisan, to the extent that even Kandapar said, if we win too much, it's not good. So these are things that we can do something about. Executive oversight resides in Parliament, and I am tired of the excuse about, there are people in Parliament who also serve as ministers. Look, let us suppose that of the 275 members of Parliament, 50 are ministers. It still leaves us 225 of them who are not ministers, who can do executive oversight if they were meant to. And I think Parliament...
But on that question, there's always the motivation, right? Most of them are expecting to be ministers eventually. So in obstructing the executive, it will almost be sabotaging their own ambition.
Yeah, but you see, though, once we start making that excuse, we can always make excuses for people refusing to do the right thing. That's the same reason why, instead of having an attorney general who will crack down on corruption, we invented the FASICA, Office of Special Prosecutor, who will do nothing. That is the same reason why, instead of saying that Nanadu was doing bull when he wanted to remove Domilogo, the Supreme Court looked on askance while he did that. We can always find excuses for doing nothing. The only condition for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. I think that when bad things are happening, men of principle should stand up. The reason why America and Britain and all that became what they did was because there were people who put their societies first. And that is part of why we are witnessing Galamsey, in which 80-year-olds are investing in digging pits and getting mines while the forests are destroyed, the environment is polluted, and deformed children are being born, and people are drinking brown water, and people are on media defending those things. We should not do those things. We should put our country first. It seems that there are too many people in our country who think their parties matter more than the country, and they will happily destroy the country to help their parties, until we get to where people say, I am putting my country first, and we honor and respect men who do the right thing, who continue to circle. As we sit here now, I know people are talking about, we need constitutional reform, our constitution. The typical example is this executive versus legislators. And the Ghana constitution is 3 times the length of the United States constitution. And that 1/3 of our constitution has held America to almost 250 years of vibrant development and all that. It is not in the constitution. It's in our hearts. It's in our brains. It is living up to the taste of the country that Ephraim Amu saw when he wrote Yanara Assassini, long before Ghana came into being. It is the nation Aborigines Rights Protection Society we're trying to protect. Somebody said if that happened today, all the lawyers will have gone for pieces of land and they will have gone to fight for us. It is us. We have seen the enemy and it's us. All of it.
Yeah. All right. But Manasseh, I don't know if you had any comments with respect to the issue of the journalist not maybe being a little bit biased against the NDC versus the NPP. I mean, Conrad, okay, maybe you aren't here, but Conrad raised that question of the unequal treatment of the NDC and the
No,
NPP.
I heard it.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, I think when the politicians are in opposition, they think journalists don't talk enough. When they are in government, they think journalists talk too much. And the very stories we do, sometimes I heard something about pseudo corruption stories. And I tell you, these are not the issues. About this guinea fowl story I did a story about Sada. It's a complete documentary. I've heard this over the past 8 years that I lied about the former president. This program was started by males and then money was voted. They gave 32.4 million cedis to a construction company called ACI Construction to plant trees. They should watch that documentary. People went to cut down forest. The Damongo area is forested. People went to cut down shea nut trees and planted acacia and others that did not survive. And I spoke to the people. They said, well, this did not, it's not a success story. On record, they were supposed to do guinea fowl, a project that Asada Asuntaba Guinea Fowl Marketing and Production Company Limited, private public partnership. So SADA voted 15 million. And then the private company was supposed to have added more than that to get 56% to form a joint venture. This money from the state was paid into the private company's account and not the joint venture account. The money was squandered. The guinea fowls were not produced. Prior to that, that same company from the RLG staple was paid money by the Youth Employment Agency to train 2,000 youth in guinea fowl rearing. Again, I investigated the JIDA. Not a single person was trained. So the project failed. The guinea fowls were not produced and exported as we were told, and the money was locked up. When I did the story, there were these political jokes around it that the guinea fowls flew away, the same way they say the excavators developed feathers and flew. So consistently, the NDC people would go and then take this joke that the guinea fowls flew away and try to discredit the story I did. But if you watch my documentary, the Sad Sada Saga, it's online, YouTube. There is nowhere that we said the guinea fowls flew away. The substance of the story remains true. On this fourth thing, the president develops a code of conduct that says, do not take gifts from business people, because if you have to deal with them in your private capacity, your official capacity, your private interest may conflict with your public duty. And what did we see? He took a gift from this contractor. I'm in the fourth story. And when they went to Shraj, they said that the vehicle came, he was out campaigning, and when he returned in November 2012, he ordered that the vehicle be put in the presidential pool. The evidence I had, which they did not respond to, and it's in the Shraj report, was that in February 2013, this vehicle was cleared at the Tema port by a private clearing agency. So the vehicle was 2012, put in the presidential pool, fitted with armors and all of that. And then in 2013, it went to be cleared. So as a journalist, I had to put these facts out.
Okay.
Now, they said, oh, when NPP came, we were quiet. Someone said that, and I pointed out to him that I have done more investigative stories and impactful journalistic work under Akufo-Addo, and I'm saying this for the first time, than under the Mahama administration. Everybody would agree that for the past 4 or 3 years, the Fourth Estate has been the leading accountability media outlet in Ghana. Who helped establish the Fourth Estate? I did. If you take contracts for sale, when NPP came, they kept saying we had saved billions of cedis. Akufo-Addo and Kenoforiata, budget and State of the Nation address. And when I did contracts for sale, they shut up. The SML scandal has been described by Kwesi Pratt and others as the mother of all scandals. In this Fourth Republic, there hasn't been a scandal that is as big as the SML scandal. Who investigated that? I did. I did a story, the COVID-19 scandal Akufo-Addo initiated, which won me the Nobel Zongo African Investigative Journalist Award. These are just a few of the many investigations I did, in addition to starting the Fourth Estate under the auspices of the Media Foundation for West Africa. And I did this at very, very difficult times when I had to leave the country on 2 occasions, one to South Africa, the second to Germany, when I had to go through mental trauma and I started going for therapy. And part of the recommendation was I take a break, and that's how I applied to Harvard, and I'm still here in a different university in the US. But let us consider this. Somebody puts a picture of a journalist on television and says, you don't know this person. This is Ahmed Swale. This is where he lives. If you find him, attack him and I'll pay. Ahmed Swale was shot and killed, and nobody did anything. And I agree very much with what Dr. Atta Kennedy said, that sometimes those of us who are in the arena fighting, not that we are not, we don't fear, not that we don't have families or we just want to die. No, like everyone else, sometimes they say you are fearless, you have a tough skin. It is not true. You're just taking a risk. You are going out there to fight for Ghana knowing that if you are killed, those you are fighting for, some of them are going to even jubilate. And when Domelevo was hounded out, I wrote a piece saying Domelevo, Al-Hassan, and the soldier. And there is this joke in Tamale about a soldier who often came to a food joint to misbehave, beat, and molest people. So they agreed that one morning, if the soldier came, they were going to hold him and then beat him up. The morning came, and Al-Hassan went and then held this soldier, and everyone was standing there looking at Al-Hassan.
They didn't join him.
Sound beating alone. That is how our society has become. So the reality is that within this period, I have said it many times that under Mahama, I did my journalism. When I did a fourth story, Dr. Manepuama even offered me police protection. And I said no, because the environment was so safe that I didn't feel threatened enough to want to go out to get police protection. I couldn't reject that in the Akufo-Addo era. But the question is, how many people would go through all of this and still want to keep fighting, knowing that when they are killed, they are not going to get justice? Ahmed Swale, nobody has been held responsible, including the Kennedy Japan, who said, Momon and Mitriaka. Nothing happened to anybody. And what happened to Domelevo in 2020, if this had happened to any such official in another country, there would have been so much protest in the streets of Ghana that President Akufo-Addo would have lost the election. And finally, when things of that nature even go to court, our judiciary does not also help. The modern Ghana journalists who were beaten and molested, when it went to court, eventually they awarded them like 40,000 cedis. The Techiman South victims, people who were killed, they said 45,000 cedis. But the same judiciary awarded like 1.9 million cedis to somebody who claimed whose details were used for Uber and others. And then somebody whose copyright was infringed by, I think, CAF was awarded $250,000 US. I'm saying this to make a point that the institutions that would also protect people like this don't seem to know or care, or sometimes they are complicit. Domelevo's issue could have been decided within 3 weeks, because the NPP and Bagwen's case was decided in 3 weeks. In Domelevo's case, how many years did it take? 3 years for the Supreme Court to interpret the constitutionality of the president's sacking. So all of these institutions gang up in a way against the civic voices. I agree perfectly, and I want to conclude by re-emphasizing what Dr. Arthur Kennedy said, that it is very convenient for people to give excuses that for ABC reason I cannot do things I'm supposed to do as a parliamentarian. But if you go in there, and when I was writing my book, I interviewed Muntaka, and he said, if you look at the MPs, the 275 MPs, not up to 100 of them come to Parliament thinking of the work of Parliament. From day one, they are coming to make money. And he says some of them are involved in visa racketeering and all manner of things to get money. So it is not so much about the Constitution. And I again agree with Dr. Arthur Kennedy that it is the people. If you want to go to Parliament and you want to do what is right, even if all the members of Parliament for the incumbent party or the governing party cannot talk, what about those in opposition? And we know that Samuel Okudzeto-Ablakwa, what he did in the 7th Parliament, if we had like 10 MPs doing that, because if you're in Parliament, you get to see things, documents that the average person or journalist may not see. And I think we all owe this country a duty to at least sacrifice, because if you take the best countries of this world, they are not angels, but they have people who are prepared to sometimes pay the price for what they believe in and to help their countries.
Okay. All right. So let me just go to Arthur Kennedy quickly, and let's talk about the future of the NPP. When the NDC lost the election in 2008, you attributed part of it to the lack of leadership, and that some strong leading members of the party who had occupied executive positions within the party decided to join the government and become part of the executive. And so it weakened the party as an institution or a system. And basically its infrastructure fell apart and contributed to the loss of support or the base in that election. And looking at the current NPP, given that they have lost this election by such a large margin, its stronghold in Kumasi didn't show up in this election at all. Is there a leadership that can shore up this base and bring them to where they were to possibly win future election?
Yes, but before I answer that, let me put on record my admiration and appreciation for the work done by people like Manasseh Azure Awuni. My brother, some of us pray for you all the time. And I want to put on record today that in the Domilovo case, there was an audit of the Supreme Court that had been completed, and the management letter had been sent to the court. So the Supreme Court was colluding with the presidency to get rid of an auditor general who might cause trouble to them. So what he's saying is right, that institutions that should protect people don't. The police don't, the judiciary don't. I mean, in 2020, so many of our citizens left home to go and vote, and they all ended up being killed. And a few days later, the Electoral Commission chair described the election as peaceful. This 2024 election, some of our fellow countrymen died. I always think, when I'm thinking of journalists like Manasseh, the question that Mike Ejiro reports Kublin asking him. He says, is Ghana worth dying for? Let us make these people feel that indeed Ghana is worth dying for by celebrating them. When you see them on the streets, walk up to them and shake hands and say, we thank you for what you are doing. We're praying for you. You see people like Frimpong Boateng and what did they call Martin Amedu, go up to them and give them encouragement so that they will know that there are people down here who appreciate what is it that they're trying to do. We talk about NPP. Yes, there is leadership that can take it to where it needs to go, but that leadership is not in office. All those who are leaders now, or most of them, are Akufo-Addo sycophants. They are bootlickers. That is the reason why he was able to change, what do they call it, the chairman and general secretary.
Yes.
He did that, and when he did that, and everybody kept quiet, so they would keep their seat at the table, be able to feed at the trough. He concluded that he owned the party, and more to the point, he owned his government. Even President Kufuor, who I admire for being a gentleman and everything, failed the party. He was the only person who had the prestige and the resources to be able to stand up and fight Akufo-Addo, but he went down because he said, quote, let all of you go and read about Pierre Trudeau as a former Prime Minister of Canada, not his son who is Prime Minister now, and see how he intervened whenever there was crisis in his country. I mean, he was just admirable, unbelievable. We need that kind of sacrificial leadership in order to make this country what it needs to be. All these countries we see and read about, America, Canada, Britain, whatever it is, have had exemplary leaders, both in and out of government. We can never be the country we want to be if we are not prepared to take risks. And the MPP's revival will begin to return into its core principles. I know MPP leaders who gave their houses as collateral to take loans to build the party, people who took other loans, people who gave their brilliance. Justice D.F. Annan walking to somebody's house and giving them money so that you guys could be viable. Those kind of leaders are gone today. People see the MPP like you see Trotro. You get in it at Medina, it drops you at Accra, and you are done. Whether the tire best or whatever, you don't care because it took you to where you wanted to go. We need car owners who know that if the car breaks down, it is their property. They own it.
Okay. So, but I mean, let me just ask you, since I have this opportunity, you worked with Akufo-Addo very closely. Did you see some of these characteristics in him prior to him becoming a president? The fact that he appears to be, yes.
Yes, you know, though, that I used to be very strongly pro Akufo-Addo, and I became anti-Akufo-Addo, and most people didn't understand. I think between 2008 and 2016, Akufo-Addo underwent a transformation, and only he can explain what that transformation was. In 2008, I remember, and I was one of the people who always used to take him on. I remember once in a meeting, he said, when I'm president, I don't want the DC for his central being an NDC member. I said, why? He said, but why should that be? He will sabotage me. I said, Nana, he's a Ghanaian. And he says, look at him. And everybody, of course, the sycophants were all laughing.
Mm-hmm.
So I got angry because I was being mocked. And I said, so I banged on the table and I said, so tell me why 50 years ago, the leaders of this party were prepared to delay independence because of decentralization. We paid and sent people to Britain to argue with the British government because decentralization was so important. Tell me why the presidential candidate of that party now disdains decentralization. You could hear a pin drop in the room. You know, we argued all the time, and he lied. He showed my opinion, but he started changing. He once told me, he said, that Atake, me, I don't like the presidential system. I'm quoting Nanado.
Okay.
I asked why. He said, because it gives too much power to one person. He says, power is dangerous in the hands of one person. He says, the prime minister, you are only a primus inter pares. So your colleagues can bring you to heel when you misbehave. So something changed in him. And I am heartbroken by the government he has led and who he has become.
Yeah. In fact, in your book, you praised him for being someone who doesn't carry grudges. And then he's open to, very, maybe if you like, aggressive, pushbacks against his position.
All the time. And actually, once I told him, and he agreed with me, I said, once you are president, there is no time to read or to learn. So let me draw up a list of books that you will read and other people will read with you. So every week we'll discuss, because this came about because we were discussing speeches. And he said, the Gettysburg Address was the greatest speech in history. And I said, it wasn't even Lincoln's best speech. So he and Apino turned and said, what? I said, go and read Lincoln's second inaugural.
Yeah.
That is his best speech. Lincoln's second inaugural. Yeah. And Apino, when he came back and said, boy, I like your knowledge of history and all that. So we went into a discussion of how leaders learn, Yeah. So he changed.
Yeah. In fact, that speech was adapted from Pericles' funeral oration 2,000 years ago.
It was very good. I mean, it's like a sermon, to bind the wounds of those who have been hurt, to comfort the widow. It's just a moving speech. Lincoln's second.
All right. Okay. So thank you very much, Dr. Arthur Kennedy. And Conrad, let's hear your remarks about the future of the NDC. Now you have power. What should we expect? You are muted. Okay, you are muted. Cora, you're muted. Yes.
Yeah, Mark, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yes. I didn't quite get your full question, but I presumed you were talking about what the future of the NDC should be, given we have power. Am I correct?
Yes. Okay, we are losing you. I don't know if you have a problem with your connection.
If you can hear me, I'll proceed. Can you hear me?
Okay, proceed. Yes.
Yes. So in terms of the future, I expect that the NDC will use its emphatic mandate for the good of the country. So one of the things that I expect the NDC to do is to set about righting the many wrongs that have been decade. So I expect that all loot that has been, if you like, pilfered from the good people of Ghana would be retrieved. We've got more than enough of that to help us rebuild our country. And not just retrieved, but people have to bear the consequences for their actions. So that it serves one as a deterrent for NGOs who may also be tempted to get involved in the act of transferring public resources into their private kitties, if that makes sense. And two, of course, there must be punishment. It's not just enough to retrieve assets, there must be punishment for them. So that people realize that, look, we don't just come and take back what you've taken and let you go. And then next time you hope to take it and hope that we won't come and get it. So that's one item. The other thing is I expect I expect the institutions to be reset. And so all the institutions, I expect sanity back in Parliament. I expect that our courts will be reset. And I will always stand judiciary who is found to be a politician should be thrown out. We need a professional judiciary, one that administers justice, and not that one that hearkens to the whims and caprices of the executive. Of course, I mean, my brother Manasseh, by the things he said, testifies to the fact that President Mahama is a completely different person. Even when things were said against him, he did not go down. Were not chased out of the country. So I'm very assured that the media will have the space to play their role as the fourth realm of the estate. And again, here, all I would say is that look, we realize it. And I'm glad my brother has admitted that, look, I mean, the joke about guinea fowls fly to the extent that it can fly that far. And unfortunately, that became the whole, people focused on guinea fowl flying to Burkina, which is not possible. A guinea fowl cannot even fly out of the town in which it is, not even a few houses can it fly past. You know, equally, look, the whole issue of Ford, the fundamental point that in the end, what was said was that the vehicle was put back into the protocol pool of vehicles. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, the options would have been to return the vehicle all the way. And as I said, as soon as the President Mahama became aware of it, he directed that it should be sent back to the state protocol pool of vehicles. Now, whether that took a month or two or however long, the important point is that Mahama did not benefit from that. I mean, why would a president take a second-hand Ford Expedition vehicle? I wouldn't even take that. Okay. A fair man like me, it's serious business. And I'm glad that Manasseh has carried on. I want Manasseh to carry on and hold us to to account. If there is any whiff of corruption or untoward behavior or misgovernance, it must be exposed. And I hope that the many journalists, and when I said 99%, I didn't mean all journalists or the entire media, but the truth of the matter, we all know that a large chunk of journalists, you expose rot to a journalist in Ghana these days, and they expect you to pay something before they publish the story. Not just because I'm in opposition, but I know that's the reality. And so the whole thing about Solé and all that stuff, it has destroyed our media space. And I hope that the media will become independent. Because if you rely on Solé from me, are you going to be independent enough? And there are many who don't take that kind of thing. But the vast majority, and the little, even as an opposition chairperson, as a lay person, I see that. I think that the NPP must also take this catastrophic defeat and rebuild. I pray that the likes of my senior brother Atta Kennedy and the many well-meaning people in the NPP will get the party back, the party of the Rocha, the party that is for rule of law, not this kind of, excuse my language, lawless rabble that we have had over the last 4 years. That is not the NPP I recognize growing up, because a strong opposition is good for governance. We don't want a decimated opposition that fights within itself and allows the government to run roughshod with all. The NDC humble itself and govern for the good of the people and realize that the mandate given to us is for the good of the people and not to gloat over. And I also pray that it will also be an awakening for my brothers in the NPP to re-energize themselves, re-galvanize them, and ensure that the government works for Mother Ghana. And of course, to my brothers in the media, freedom is back. You are free to poke in every corner of government under the NDC and bring up any rot so that we can right the wrongs in real time and move our country forward. Thank you very much.
All right. Okay. So, I mean, we would have to draw the curtains here. And I am, sincerely grateful for your presence here. In fact, you both are fellow Vandals. And I'm grateful that this panel has been made extremely exciting by my colleague members of the only city in Ghana, that is the Commonwealth Hall. Dr. Atta Kennedy, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Again, I hope you have become a good friend of the show, and anytime we call, we hope to get you on board again.
Thank you.
Yes. And then Conrad, I mean, you and I are friends. And so anytime I call, I hope you would join us. And I'm grateful for your presence here this afternoon. To our viewers, thanks for joining us. We are here because of you, and we keep bringing you very insightful conversations as the year rolls along to an end. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Always at the
Tonight,